Hey, Burns, what's happening?
Well, a lot in the country, Dick. It just seems to get worse by the minute, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, there's so much going on. We got Afghanistan, we got COVID, we got forest fires. You guys got hurricanes. And then there's mortality. What a deal. So I wanted to start off because people always ask, and you're one of them that always asks, as a military person, what do you think? Well, you know, I kind of look at Afghanistan as Vietnam deja vu all over again. And after 50 years, Vietnam seems to have done surprisingly well. And so maybe there's hope. What really surprises me is how the Taliban seem to have mellowed, if that's possible. But also I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that they're bitter enemies of ISIS. I haven't figured that out one way or the other. But I think what we saw with the airport bombing and the hotel bombing, more is to come. And what I'm really afraid of is somebody's going to shoot down a C-17 full of 600 people.
Geez, where do I start? First of all, I beg to differ. I don't think the Taliban, the Taliban has mellowed. I would not expect the Taliban to ever mellow. I think the situation, and this is a terrible irony, in Afghanistan as we speak, it's worse than it was prior to our entry 20 years ago to root out Osama bin Laden and to make sure that Afghanistan wasn't a safe harbor for terrorists who could strike America. We now have three different, including the Taliban, major Muslim terrorist organizations afoot in Afghanistan. So it's worse. And worse still is the fact that they now have all of our armaments that we didn't get out of the country or destroyed before we got out of the country. So I think this situation, I hate to even envision the prospect of what you just described, but I have to agree with you that it sure as hell could happen. God forbid that it did.
But if you read through the speeches and stuff that's going on, the guy who's their political something or other was made a comment. We need to keep people, no brain drain, blah 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 blah. And if nothing else, that's an improvement. The fact that they do want to allegedly develop, and even if it turns out going to hell in a handcart, it's got to be better than it's been for the last 20 years.
I see it getting worse before it gets better.
I think you're right, but since people have made comments about it, I just wanted to show I wasn't picking on
you. The thing about Afghanistan is where it lies geographically. And I don't think, given its huge mineral deposits, including rare earth, that the Chinese are going to stay out or not try to exercise political influence and use their power to insinuate themselves into Afghanistan now that there's this vacuum, and beyond the vacuum, a failed war. There's no choice but to call this a failed war. You also have Iran to the west that shares a border, they're not going to sit on their hands given their desire to develop nuclear weaponry. And, Obama's bullshit aside, that's exactly what they're trying to do. I also think, along with this scenario you described that would be horrific, that inevitably this will be a hostage crisis on steroids, and that Biden, much like Obama did with Iran, Biden will be shipping, pallets of cash to the Taliban, to Al Qaeda, and to ISIS. I just think that's going to be in the cards because he shows there's no indication, despite some half-ass rhetoric to the contrary, that he has the stomach for dealing with this situation. I mean, as we speak, we haven't retaliated for the death of those Marines or the deaths of over 100 civilians. Now, he said he will do it at the time and place of his choosing, but to me, those are hollow words. The other thing is, given the debacle, and if you watched his press conference, he kept looking down at his notes and acting real sad. And I thought to myself over and over again, would I ever follow this guy into war? I mean, what behavior he looked like a beaten man. And now the head is rolled. Forget the calls for impeachment. That's not going to happen with the Democrats controlling the Congress and the vote in the Senate. But now the head is rolled. There's got to be culpability somewhere. I give it back to you.
Well, okay, General Higgins, let me ask you, if you were head of the Joint Chiefs or you were president or whatever else, what would you do?
Okay, just to clarify, are you asking what would I have done or what would I do now that it's a big mess?
I would start off with the former and end with the latter.
Well, I have no disagreement with Donald Trump having decided it's high time to get out of a 20-year war. But we hadn't had any casualties in nearly, in terms of our armed forces there, any casualties in nearly 2 years. And he and Mike Pompeo had negotiated directly with the Taliban, and there were conditional terms to how our withdrawal would work, and a fair warning that if any American in uniform or out of uniform was killed by the Taliban, that there would be an overwhelming reaction. So I was good with that. I wasn't wringing my hands, oh my God, we shouldn't leave Afghanistan. I mean, if our military can't, purportedly the strongest military in the world, can't win a war in 20 years, then it's high time to get out because we're just kidding ourselves. But then we have enter Joe Biden. Common sense. I think a high school student who gets good grades could figure out, well, Mr. Higgins and Mr. Griggs, if you ask me, I'd get all the Americans out first, the non-military personnel. Well, sure as hell makes sense to me. And then I would negotiate what to do with the Afghans who were sympathetic to the American cause and worked with our military during the 20-year war. But I wouldn't necessarily, as Biden is doing, try to bring them over unvetted to the United States, I try to negotiate with some of the countries, Islamic countries, that conduct their foreign affairs favorably with the United States, that we have a relationship with, and see how many they would take instead of shipping them all over here. I mean, this is all part of Obama's efforts to transform the country radically. And as he always would thump his chest, we're not a country of Judeo-Christian origins. You know, there was an active involvement of Muslims and Muslim doctrine in the founding of the country. I remember him saying that. You can go on YouTube and find that readily. So what are we doing? You're the guy, Dick, who said, and it may have been in part tongue in cheek, but I don't think that whatever part it wasn't very large. I mean, there was mostly truth in it, that this is a nation living 5-6 centuries ago. And, you know, moving hundreds of thousands of Afghans ahead of Americans into our country unvetted is like putting a square peg in a round hole culturally, religiously. You know, I just don't get the thinking. And lastly, on the heels of what just happened, it shows that we should have maintained a larger force as we move to the extrication of our troops. And we damn sure shouldn't have given up, help me, Dick, is it Bergstrom? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Air Force Base? I mean, we only have the Air Force Base in
Bagram.
Bagram, thank you. I apologize. Bagram, thank you. I mean, why would we do that? The plan should have been to maintain those Air Force, I presume they're Air Force bases, in perpetuity because of their strategic value vis-a-vis the Far East and the Middle East. But we've given up our assets, our airports. It's a colossal debacle, and the buck stops on Biden's desk.
Well, I would agree that we should have left the military in until the evacuation was done. But it's happened. So, you know, what we need to kind of do is move forward, if that's even at all possible.
I believe that as long as there is an American who served, an American civilian who served the war effort in whatever capacity, that we have no business completely leaving that country and leaving that individual or individuals and their families behind. So,
but you know, there are a number of contractors who married Afghanistanis, et cetera, that don't want to leave.
well, I mean, I can't say, Dick, you're wrong, because I don't know. Sounds reasonable to me what you're saying. But on that basis, before we even began the wind down and the failed extrication, wouldn't we have gathered all that kind of information? Now, instead, what we did, I should say Joe Biden did, is he turned over the names of all Americans and all of the Taliban working with the Americans a list to the Taliban. Well, geez, who would do that? Again, it's beyond the pale. It's beyond common sense. You don't have to go to West Point or Annapolis to figure out that one. So now they're going door to door, and they're going to find them. And these people are going to go into prison cells if they're not killed outright. And then that'll become the negotiating chip to get cash. They don't need to negotiate for assets. We left all those for them. But terrorist organizations, like anything else, feed on cash. And anybody who watches Biden and Pelosi and Schumer know that this current Democratic-led Congress and presidency spends money like there's, like you pull it off of tree limbs. So they're not stupid. I mean, they're sophisticated. That's why the towers were brought down and the Pentagon was struck.
Well, out of curiosity, where did you get this information that we turned over a list of everybody and
Oh, it's all over the
they're
news.
going to go
dude.
into prisons or whatever?
Yeah,
I mean,
no, but that was my comment as to what I think they'll do.
yeah, but you started.
Hear me out. But my comment that they turned over the list has been in the mainstream media as well as the publications I read.
Well, you
I mean,
must
it's not some right-wing thing, if that's what you're thinking, Dick.
No, I thought maybe you'd gotten it from Gilbert.
Our listeners don't know who in the hell you're talking about.
Well, when I look at these things from a military or a civilian standpoint or anything else, regardless of what's happened in the past, we got to move forward to where we're going, and we have to come up with a plan. And agreeing with you, there really is no plan. I mean, it's a goat rope of the first degree, and that is not an anti-Islamic comment. Goats, camels, whatever. But where do we go from here?
Well, I think I gave you my opinion. Where do we go from here as we speak today?
Yeah.
Well, we have to strike back. The Marines who just died in that bombing, we can't let that go unanswered. Not if, as we have long claimed and our presidents have long claimed, that we're the strongest military in the world. You just don't do that.
Okay, where's the target?
I can't tell you right now. I'm not an expert on Afghanistan, but it shouldn't be too hard for our military to figure out how we strike back. I don't know. It might be you send special forces in. I can't believe for a minute that in Afghanistan today, we can't identify ISIS easily, the Taliban easily, or Al-Qaeda that is re-entering the country easily.
Well, I hope you're right.
And if we can't, then to hell with our intelligence department. I mean, the interesting thing is, it was the Brits who said within hours of the bombing, a suicide bombing is imminent. That wasn't US intelligence, that came from the British. And when I read that headline after I got up in the morning, I thought, my God, I wonder if they're going to, if they're right. And damn, within about 2 or 3 hours, it happened. And that didn't come from U.S. intelligence. And the several reports I read didn't say the Brits in concert with U.S. intelligence have determined. It just said British intelligence. Now, I've long thought that Israeli intelligence is world class. And I mean, the Brits were a major contributor in World War II from an intelligence perspective to the winning of the war. You know that. You read history. I read history. I don't know. I think American citizens today have to demand answers because our media is not demanding answers. We have to demand answers. We need to demand it from Joe Biden. We need to demand it from the Pentagon. We need to demand it from the CIA, the State Department. I mean, these guys sit back there in Washington, D.C., fat and happy in their air-conditioned offices, and people are dying. And they're dying because of I want to watch my language, a screwed up, what did you tell me to call it? Not a retreat, a retrograde?
Oh, yes, that's the military term.
That's the military term. So I'll try to be consistent with that and call it a retrograde. But I think the word retrograde or retreat either word is too kind to describe what we're seeing.
Well,
and as you've said, Dick, to have gone through Vietnam and how it ended, and repeat history. And by the way, my sense, but you were in Vietnam, I was not, so I'll defer to you. But I think this is more screwed up than getting people off the rooftop of the embassy in Saigon. I mean, I remember them pushing assets off of aircraft carriers, but those assets went into the ocean. They didn't go into the hands of the Viet Cong. I mean, did we leave millions and millions and millions of dollars of assets to the Viet Cong?
Yes.
We did. Okay. Well.
Yeah, because you can only dump so much off the pier.
Well, you can blow stuff up. I don't know. American taxpayers, let's think about this for a minute. Apart from, and I wish I had, I think it's something order of magnitude around 600 million or 700 million, they're saying, in assets that have been seized by the Taliban. But think about that. That came out of our pockets. And now, in the midst of this human tragedy in Afghanistan, Nancy Pelosi sits on her goddamn ass in the Congress and is trying to push through something on the order of, and you never know what's true in terms of the number, $3.5 to $5 trillion of goodies for every liberal cause, radical liberal cause under the sun. And maybe radical liberal is redundant. That's how they think. The spending doesn't stop. And by the way, this very week, Biden's been worried about various woke issues and the adoption by the military, when we've got to ask, a tough-minded executive style president would have the military in on the carpet and saying, what the hell went wrong? Unless, of course, the military, and this could be the case, said, do A or B, but whatever you do, don't do C, and Biden did C. Then he can't call the military on the carpet. He's got to look in the mirror. But this guy couldn't find a mirror. He can't find the sidewalk leading into the West Wing. If you can tell, I'm getting hot.
Yeah, well, I had a thought, but you got me so wound up, I forgot what the thought was. But
You're the military guy.
well, yeah, but see, I'm a cost benefit guy. The military teaches courses of action, A, B, C, D, pros and cons, pick it. I have always looked at it from a cost benefit. What's the cost versus the benefit? And that analysis, I don't think, was done because the military doesn't operate that way. Well, at least in my experience, and I've been retired for so many years, I really don't know. But
Dick,
without that kind of analysis, you're just up the creek without a paddle, or is it creek?
private business does the same thing, Dick. I don't disagree with what you're saying. But are you suggesting that we went into Afghanistan without a specific mission, a specific timeline, acceptable scenarios in terms of its culmination, what we would describe as defeat and what we would describe as victory? I mean, if your answer to that is in the affirmative, I'm telling you, I could have done a better job. I've run good sized businesses. I know the questions to ask, and I'm not afraid to put people, they make them responsible and accountable for responding to my questions and then executing. I mean, this is a goddamn disaster. And you got to feel for the people who have died, the soldiers who were over there for 20 years, or, all of the, people who served 1, 2, 3, 4 tours. The Marines just lost. The Americans being abandoned by their country. Biden kowtowing to the August 31st deadline of the Taliban instead of telling them to stick their deadline where the sun doesn't shine. I mean, I remember a number of presidents other than Obama and Biden saying we don't negotiate with terrorists. But August 31st, yes, sir. Here's Biden. Yeah, you betcha.
Well, to answer your original question, I think the answer is yes. We went in with no plan. And the issue was always, I think, more political than military. And what we did is we tried to apply military expediencies to political issues. We for some reason, we are totally incapable of geopolitical thought. I think that's the right term.
That is the right term.
We just, God, like, okay, carry a big stick, beat him over the head, it'll solve everything. Well, it never has, never will. Or, we ought to do this, that, or something else and, quote, win wars. Well, you don't win wars. The only way you really win wars, if there is such a thing, is by putting boots on the ground and taking land. That's the bottom line.
You've said you don't win wars in a previous podcast. I think I know what you mean by that, and I'm not taking it literally, but I'll just say this. The North won the Civil War and the Union was preserved. Now, that was a military victory. So the Union won. The Union was preserved first and foremost, and the slaves were freed. So that's just one example. But I'll say this, Dick, if you're properly planning, you decide what constitutes a victory. Now, One victory might be you kill every son of a bitch over there. Or another victory is we're for geopolitical reasons, we want to insinuate ourselves in so that we have a legitimate shot at establishing airfields, so that our military can deal with any issues of war or potential war that may arise in the Far East and the Middle East. And that constitutes a victory. Those two, I don't know the term would be extremes, but those two examples show that a victory isn't necessarily what we think in our minds, the war movies we watched at the theater as kids, and you kill Japanese and Germans. I mean, the military in concert with the commander-in-chief, the civilian authorities, should have decided, here's what a victory is. And I agree with you. At least, I don't believe, although one could argue it maybe or surmise it, I don't think this is a case of terrific planning and piss poor execution. I tend to believe that the planning was suspect from the get-go, and now the execution is even worse. In other words, this is an unmitigated disaster.
I would agree with you 100%. And I think the problem is, and you've got exactly 2 more minutes. Well, actually, you're 2 minutes over. We never did have a plan. We were so used to the way things were bouncing along for 20 years that we lost sight of what victory would have looked like. And we got into building schools, things that the military is not really supposed to do, even though we've done civil affairs for years. I was a civil affairs officer for a while, but that's not what we're geared up to doing. We're geared up to putting boots on the ground and taking land, and you keep on taking land until the enemy has no land left. We didn't have that. And we lost sight of really what victory would have looked like. Think back over the last 10 years, and I use 10 years because it's fair. Can you name anything anywhere where somebody told you what victory was going to look like?
As an American citizen, the answer is no. I don't even have to think about it.
Well, say you were in the military.
And a good example of my response to your question is Biden's press conference yesterday. I don't know how many times I even turned to my wife and said, my God, he's used the word mission, 24 times already. And I said, I don't know what his mission was. He kept talking about our mission, our mission, our mission, our mission, but I'm pretty well read. I'm pretty well versed. I'm a newsaholic. I've never heard what the mission was. I mean, I'd like to think the mission wasn't, here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring all the Muslim terrorists, because we're not going to vet the Afghans, over on cargo planes to the US and distribute them like we are the illegal aliens crossing the southern border. And we're going to abandon the Americans. Was that the mission? I hope to God it wasn't, but that's how it's playing out.
Well, but you see, without a mission, and in order to have a mission, you have to have goals, objectives, etc. From my perspective, I don't think we had any of that. And so we would have known success if it had kicked us in the ass. In other words, if you don't know where you're going, you're probably going to end up somewhere else. And the somewhere else is not where you expected to be.
Well, my last comment, if I may, is the reason Americans are in the dark in terms of what you just asked has a lot to do with the fact that journalism in this country disappeared long ago, decades ago. So we don't have a genuine press that on behalf of the American people is asking the administration the hard questions. We
Okay,
don't have it.
okay. Now, next week, let's think about maybe mortality, but let's just see what happens.